Well, thank you, Dennis. And I was actually really wanting to be here a couple of days ago, but obviously plans changed as Harvey came through Texas and then decided to stop over Houston area for quite a few days. They were expecting 20-something inches of rain, and some places got well over 50. I think 50 counties were impacted under emergency disaster by the state of Texas, by the governor. You know, I was thinking about how we've all been praying for revival. I've been in revival the last 2 weeks. And it's really about perspective, isn't it? Because I've had a lot of people ask me questions like, well, do you think this and do you think that? And really, when you're in the fray of something like this as the church, it's not an issue of our eschatology at the moment. It's an issue of our response. And I like what Eleanor Roosevelt used to say, and she said this about women, but really it fits for all of us. She said, women are like tea bags. You can't tell how strong they are until they've been put in hot water. And I think all of us recognize a lot of heroes, unsung heroes, emerge during times of difficulties or adversities. And so I started responding to some questions, and I said, well, you know, rather than responding and telling you, yes, I have my questions, and I'm talking to God about that. But this is not a time for us to look at what if and who did and who didn't. In fact, I was at a gathering of pastors over a week ago at First Baptist Church in Houston. One of our county commissioners, Harris County commissioner, was there. He came barefooted because he didn't even have his shoes. One of our city councilmen were there, and others, and pastors from around the city. And the first thing I said when they asked me to kind of share where things were from my perspective, I said, first of all, I know in the media they're already trying to change the narrative. But those who tell the story define the history. So it's important for us to take this moment that we change the narrative. Even as Dennis said about Charlottesville and other things, all this racial tension, political tension, bombarding the airwaves and messing with the minds and hearts of even church people who are now divided between families and churches and everybody arguing. And yet God was trying to get the attention of the real church in real America that is not just black or white, but black, white, red, yellow, and brown, working together as the real church hand in hand. And it took a situation like what happened through Harvey, barreling down through Texas, to see what the real church was really all about. And it didn't matter what political party they were of, didn't matter what denomination, didn't matter what their religion was. Everywhere I went, all across the Gulf, and all of our reports from Rockport to Corpus Christi to throughout Beaumont and Jasper Newton counties, Jefferson County, Port Arthur, all of our reports of everybody on conference calls, on daily conference calls that are working together, every one of them, and people, as I began to go out to the neighborhood, said, church people are everywhere. And oftentimes it was church people who had suffered already themselves, but were out helping other people. And the testimonies that will emerge, but we have to define the story. We can't let the media create the narrative and get us back to where we were. This is our window. This is our moment. Jesus said it well in Luke 21, verse 13. In fact, it's set right in between the whole chapter and then beyond the chapter about all these earthquakes and famines and racial tensions and wars and rumors of wars. And we see that all that talking about the earth groaning and every institution being shaken. It talks about racial tension, ethnos against ethnos, kingdom against kingdom. It talks about everything we're seeing, the fires, the winds, the floods, the rains, the tsunamis, everything. But right stack middle in verse 13 of that chapter says, out of Jesus' own words, but it will turn out as an occasion for your testimony. So with all of our questions at the end of the day, what will the testimony, what will the narrative be? How the church argued about how it happened, why it happened, what did God do it, didn't God do it? Instead of saying, church, let's be the gospel, let's bring the gospel, which is good news, and let's broadcast the gospel in a very real and tangible ways so that we leverage the ecclesia, what should be the ecclesia of the church, not the institution of the church, so that the world will know and see this is the most important asset we have. And so as I was sharing again just a few days ago back at First Baptist as we gathered again, and listening to a city councilman and a county judge and their staff and some of the pastors, the first thing I said last week, and I'll come back to this, is I said, look, We've seen the media already trying to attack certain churches, even in Houston, why they didn't do this in a timely fashion. Did they flood? Didn't they flood? And I just looked at everybody and said, look, we're from different denominations. We had Anglican and Presbyterians and Baptists, Assemblies of God, the Fifth Church on the fourth corner. We had Church of God in Christ. We had Missionary Baptists. I said, right now, let's not let the world tell us who we are. Forget that. In fact, let's look at it this way. If the church that they keep trying to slam, or any other church, if they fail, you fail. If they win, we win. And it's the same for us. If we fail, they fail. If we win, they win. Let's let this be about the church, the body of Christ, the ecclesia, not about whose church is going to take preeminence or not take preeminence, who's going to get leverage and try by putting someone else down. We can't project our own frustrations on others. Let's do what we're supposed to do, stay in our own lane. If we all do what we're supposed to do, we all win. And so the other day, as we were talking about just all that was happening and looking at some practical things, I realized as the conversation went on that we all, from different ethnic backgrounds and different denominations, realized we're really proud of the church in the sense of the real church. And that we want the narrative in America to see that out of the storm, out of the difficulties, the church rallied together out of their own struggles to be the lighthouse of the city set on a hill within the circumstances they were in. And as a result, it's already gaining lots of equity, because even the message that Dennis had asked me to share today prior to this happening was the power of moral capital through public service. And the reality is, our leaders in every element of all the 7 mountains, and I love what you said about getting some substance to that, because it sounds good, it teaches good, it preaches good, but we have to get somewhere a little bit deeper if we're going to be able to dig deeper to get higher in expectation of the Lord and really make a transformational change in the culture in which we live, rather than just having good sermons. And the same is true in the way that we show our compassion. That we need to be very tangible in the way we express Christ, not just in declarations or proclamations, but in the actual being on site for insight. That we're out there, that people see and smell the fragrance of heaven in our lives. You heard me speak last year on 2 Corinthians 2:14, that we're like the dispenser, the sprayer, the manifester of the fragrance of God and his manifest wisdom on the earth. And the way I get that picture is that when I first got married and I sold my house and moved to my wife's house, because she had a house that was in a gated community, so we sold my house because I got robbed 3 times in 1 year, or broken into, and so I thought I'd be a little bit safer there. But I wasn't accustomed to the house. And as a man, you get up at night a few times at my age. I just turned 40 for the 20th time not too long ago. And I woke up in the middle of the night, and I'm trying to find my way. In my old house, I just walked in the dark, went right to the men's room. But this time, I'm trying to find my way. There's a little night light, and I go in there, and all of a sudden, I hear this sound. I'm like, whoa, what is that? And I smelled the most incredible fragrance. And I thought that there for sure were angels getting ready to say, "Fear not, for the Lord is with you. He's pleased with this marriage," And so I'm thinking, if I turn the lights on, I'm gonna freak out if I see an angel doing that. And finally, I turned the lights. I'm looking around. There's nothing. I was a little bit disappointed. And I looked up, and on the wall, there's a dispenser. And every few minutes, it puts out a Febreze fragrance. And those things you find in restaurants and different places, usually put in places that could potentially become stinky. And the Lord reminded me of 2 Corinthians 2:14, that we are the fragrance of heaven put into a stinky world. And we have to make a difference, not just in the words we speak, but the essence of the presence of God in our lives wherever we go. And so I believe it's important for us to be the real church. And so this narrative has changed, but I'm already seeing, because when things begin to get back to some element of footing and normalcy, our natural human tendency in our human frailty is to no longer walk in the humility that we've been brought to, but we begin to walk in this place of, now how am I going to leverage myself? If we don't care who gets the credit, and we recognize that we need each other more than ever before, and become part of something greater than ourselves, then it's not about what we get from it. It's about how do we represent Christ in the midst of any situation. Prior to the Hurricane Harvey coming in, I felt months ago to do this. On August the 6th, I called for a week of church reconciliation week for the church in America. And I asked churches on that Sunday morning across America if they would join us just for 30 seconds, a minute, take a moment to pray for the church truly to be reconciled. That even with all of our differences and our personal preferences and our denominational differences, styles of worship, prayer, ethnicity, culture, political preferences, whatever it was, let's for that one day, let's start a week of praying into intentionally what Paul spoke about, the ministry of reconciliation. Because we've been reconciled to God, we need to represent Christ as reconcilers. How will the world come to know when the church is divided? How can we heal a divided nation? So I'm saying let's start a week of reconciliation. So we started putting out prayer points every day, starting on that Sunday, August 6th. Culminating on August the 11th, we were going to go into a location in Houston that God had given me great equity with over the decades, and to honor a man named Bishop Roy Cossey. Bishop Roy Cossey just turned 85 years old on July 4th. He's been suffering with Parkinson's disease for the last 15 years. He's doing far better than they ever thought. And so we decided to culminate Reconciliation Week at his church in what was known as the Bloody Fifth Ward of Houston, Texas. And at the time when he went down there and over 50 years ago to pioneer his third or fourth church, but he heard that this place called Lyons Avenue Movie Theater was, which was during the Jim Crow laws, was one of two places that people of color, predominantly African Americans, had to go to the movie because of Jim Crow laws and racism. But when he heard it was for sale, he purchased that movie theater and declared that one day in a predominantly African American community called the Bloody Fifth Ward, because of the crime and the violence, that one day that church would be a place where all multi-ethnic gatherings of people would gather and the true church would be revealed. So in 1999, because I become friends of the family, unbeknownst to me that he had this vision since 1960-something, that I think 1967, when he purchased the building and it became their church, Latter-day Revival Deliverance Church, we brought in a multi-ethnic gathering of people. I just called it worship night to go to their church that night in 1999. And it was during that time he began to realize this is the vision I had all those years ago. And his daughter, who is a professor at Texas Southern University and at Rice University, and she's a foremost expert on African American Pentecostalism. And so she gets up and she goes, oh my goodness, unbeknownst to I knew my dad had a heart to one day see a multi-ethnic gathering, but she said, I had a literal vision. And in that vision, and I say this very carefully because I'm not saying this in a way to somehow put attention to myself, but only that God answers prayer. And that is, she gets up and she goes, I had a vision many years ago that in a predominantly African American community, an Asian man would bring a multi-ethnic gathering of people down Lyons Avenue into this place that used to be a movie theater because of racism, and a Jim Crow laws predominantly for African Americans. And now I realize that Asian man is you. Now, the fear of God, because it's not, again about a point of a person, but I think it's a point of showing all of us that God providentially puts pieces together for a time. Well, then over the years, that place that nobody wanted the real estate, including the city, when God began to do a change in that community, and now the real estate value has gone up, last year the city tried to use eminent domain to take over that facility and that place. And so we rallied together again and we fought to stand for Bishop Roy Cossey. We call him the Lion of Lyons Avenue. And we went over there, and thank God the city backed off and the real estate people backed off, and realizing that you didn't want it when it was no value to it. But now the church comes in and becomes a light, and now you want it because now the value is increased because of the presence of God in the church. And so I wanted to honor Bishop Cossey again. So on August the 11th of this year, we culminated. Bishop Harry Jackson came. Forever Jones, our friends Forever Jones, came to be with us. And we packed out that place called Latter-day Deliverance Revival Church to honor Bishop Cossey. He has 9 children, all serving God. And we call them, it's like the gifts of the Spirit. They're all there together. And it was a powerful, powerful moment of the picture of honor and respect, redemption, and reconciliation. And later that night, we hear what happens at Charlottesville. A total different the media attention is one place to build on that, while the real church is trying to intentionally work together to be the church. And yet through that, on the sundown of the day we had the solar eclipse in North America, I got to experience it twice, sort of, because I was flying from Japan and flying right through it to land into Houston. And but at the sundown that day was also the beginning of the month of Elul, which really spiritually depicts a fall house cleaning in preparation to get our hearts ready for all the holy moments and days and celebrations and festivities. We have to first take a reflection of our own hearts and lives, take a right posture of humility before God so that God can do a heart cleaning in us, a house cleaning in the fall to prepare us for where we're going to be. Now, sadly, historically, there's three things that churches had to overcome. One, poverty. But yet, whenever there has been a lack of resources, God always multiplies the fishes and the loaves throughout the history of the church. Two, persecution. But wherever the church has been persecuted, the church has still flourished and it's expanded and grown. But the one thing that the church has always had a hard time overcoming is long periods of peace and prosperity. And the reason being is that when we have peace and prosperity, what was given to us is God's intention for stewardship, to be a blessing to the nations. When we become, and there's this TV show called American Greed, so true. When we come to the place of long periods of peace and prosperity, we don't need God anymore. And now we become the gods in our own house, even in the house of the Lord. So it takes sometimes a shaking, the earth to groan, everything to be shaken that can be shaken, for God to finally get our attention, to remind us it's about stewardship. And so when I look at what happened even in the Hurricane Harvey coming through, I'm not making a judgment of who did that. I'm just saying God never intends to bring harm, but when the devil does, it's the church's responsibility to turn around and see redemption in the midst of difficulty. And so for us, we are already moving and throughout the region. We had people staging in Corpus Christi. We already had churches, because isn't the greatest asset in any community is not, first responders are not people who come from the outside. First responders are the church of Haiti, the church of Iran, the church of Indonesia, the church of the United States, the church of Mexico, the church of Colombia, a church of anywhere in the world. I don't care how difficult it is, truly the first responders, because they have the passion and the heart of God's calling for that community, is the church. And when I'm saying the church, is the real church, the ecclesia. And so we already had people staged across the Gulf for whatever happened. And of course, the hurricane hit landfall at Rockport. And so within hours, we had our friends Mercy Chefs were there. We had our people from our chapter of ministries from San Antonio and other places show up and began to immediately begin to set up in a broken down church that got hit, and to begin to set up a staging area and began to feed hot meals, starting with 2,000, now over 4,000 hot meals a day to first responders and others that are coming back. Just a simple act of kindness, but it opened up favor with county judges, county officials, because now they're coming and seeing the church being the church. And then we began to empower churches in Corpus Christi, because they were glad they didn't get the brunt of it, but they're out going to Port Aransas, and they're going over to Rockport, they're going throughout the region, and they're being the church. It doesn't matter what denomination, what ethnic background, they're working together to see a tangible expression of Christ, and it's giving them equity and favor with city governments. The same is true throughout greater Houston area. It was the most, I've been involved in disaster relief a lot, but this was a unique one because I couldn't even get out of my own house. And only by the grace of God, and I don't even know why, because so many people, even good friends of mine, suffered loss in their homes, and the water would come up on three sides of our house, and they'd begin to recede again. It would come back. We were being bombarded. And I don't know about you, but a lot of us were getting out in the middle of the rain, trying to be like Elijah, say, God, if your word is true, I have the nature just like Elijah, and I'm declaring. And we all did that. We don't know why things happen the way they do, but I knew this: whatever happened, there was going to be a redemptive side to what God could do if the church would shine as the church. And we wanted to change the narrative. And so what we had to do is get on conference calls because people we would normally all gather together, process together, had to do it. And thank God, this is one time I'm thanking God for social media. Social media was a great way of communication, and telephones were working. So we were able to actually have constant calls, dividing up the whole state to people who were already in different locations, saying, what's your greatest need? Okay, as soon as we can get trucks in, we'll get trucks there. What's your greatest need? We need this. We had Mercy Chefs then stage another kitchen down near Friendswood, Texas, and doing over 13 or 14,000 hot meals a day for first responders. And then we started getting calls from people like Michael Lindell of the My Pillow and the Lindell Foundation. And at first I'm thinking, I don't need pillows. I need water and food, and I need, antibiotics, and antibacterial things. And I went, wait a minute, people lost everything, and they're on cots, they're on floors. And so out of that relationship, we've already been able to help procure and deliver over 50,000 My Pillows. I'd never had one myself. I finally started sleeping on one. We had Cy-Fair Fire Department. We had Houston Police Department. We have Hitchcock Police Department. We have League City and Dickinson Police Departments and fire departments saying we need them. We were able to supply our community leaders with things they didn't have, from hot meals to My Pillows to cots to other resources. So there's a shared idea that it's neighbors helping neighbors, but the words without having to declare it is everybody knows. It's the church. It's the real church, the ecclesia, that's in every neighborhood, overlapping each other's efforts to help each other. Gift cards and resources, truckloads of. I had somebody fly in. I don't even know who this person is. They flew in and said, "What's an airport? We can get some resources to you." So yesterday, showed up in an airport, at Pearland Airport, dropped off a bunch of stuff, took it to a warehouse that we had procured, and flew off. Others are saying we want to get resources. So now what's happening is we're able to say, here's the wish list of all the different churches that are being shelters or points of distribution, or they're getting other resources, muck out teams. What's happening is in tandem, the body is beginning to work together. And again, doesn't matter who gets the credit. There was a church this morning that came from Baton Rouge, Healing Place Church. And because we helped them during their floods last year, they were determined to come and do a bunch of Louisiana, is it boudin or whatever it is, and all kinds of food. They wanted to do that, a few hundred of meals of that today at a church that we're doing muck outs from. So they showed up and they just started cooking away this morning. Others are bringing international aid, is bringing to our warehouse that we procured, bringing in care packages and bringing hygiene kits. And others are bringing in blankets. Everybody is trying to help each other in the midst of a crisis. And now already, out of our own need in the Gulf, we're all putting and looking at and praying for our brothers and sisters in Florida, the Caribbean, those who suffered earthquake in Mexico. This really is our moment. This is our moment to change the narrative. But we cannot let the media nor any other powers that be change the narrative of who we are, because we are the church. And those who tell the story will create the history. We can't let them be the storytellers. We need to be the storytellers. When I got called by Fox News and then CNN, and CNN aired a late night thing, I think anybody's going to watch it at 11:30 or 11:40 at night, just a 4.5-minute piece. But that thing went viral all over the world, from South Africa to Australia to Europe, saying, we're praying for you. And I'm not sure exactly what I said, but I do know this. When they kept trying to point me to controversy, I kept pointing it back saying, I'm so proud of what the church is doing to love people that don't even love them. I'm so proud of what the church is doing to be the church. And the new narrative is not racial division and political division and denominational division. It's about the church being the church, a city set on a hill. Now, I say this very carefully because I started getting a lot of messages. Because in 1996, in July of 1996, the Lord had me go on a 30-day fastedness. And I didn't go to my office. I worked out of my home. The home that was robbed 3 times or broken into 3 times. They didn't come into that time, thank God. But in 1996, I was there for 30 days just trying to seek the Lord and just doing work out of my house and not going to the office, not doing anything, not traveling. And I came out of that 30-day of fastedness and feel like, God, what is it you want to do in my life? And that I could somehow trumpet something that would touch my city and region that would have a global effect. And all I knew coming out of that 30 days was to ask the owner of an amphitheater that usually got thousands of dollars a day if I could rent for 40 straight days, the last 40 days of 1996, if I could rent his amphitheater, to call it Houston Prayer Mountain, to pray for the nations of the world. And I knew he'd say no, so I knew it had to be the pizza I didn't have, so I called him and said, I'd like to rent your amphitheater. It had an indoor place, and it also had an amphitheater to hold a few thousand people. They get thousands of dollars a day, plus concessions. I said, I want to rent your amphitheater for 40 straight days, just for us, to get churches in Houston to come together to fast and pray and to worship every night and every day for the nations of the world. And I thought for sure he'd laugh at me, and he did. But he didn't laugh for the reasons I thought. He laughed and says, I know who you are. I can't take your money. I offered him $40,000 for 40 days. Now, that's only $1,000 a day. He gets a lot more than that. So I thought he'd sure be laughing. But he said, I'll tell you what I'll do. If you'll give me half of what you just offered me, I'll let you have the 40 days. I'm going, are you kidding me? So by a miracle of God, before he even walked on that property, it was paid for. Because people thought I was crazy. I took my car, I sold it, and that was the seed money. So I was walking around. Inner city church in Denver heard about it. They wanted to pay for a day. Everybody began to chip in all over the world. Before we walked on that property, it was paid for. I never took an offering for our ministry in those 40 days because I felt like there had to be a testimony to the world around us that area churches and ministries wanted them to know that somebody cared. So the only offerings that were ever taken were not us asking, but we had a box. And the only times that monies were taken was when we wanted to give to other churches and ministries who were doing outreaches for Thanksgiving and Christmas outreaches that year. And so we took in tens of thousands of dollars without asking for a penny for us. And by the time the 40 days was done, the Lord began to give, during that time, but God began to give us a word. I had somebody from Mercy Works in YWAM come down to visit with me the other day and said, I was part of a worship team during that 40 days when I was with YWAM and then Last Days Ministries and others. And others began to email me, message me on Facebook, and they said, Doug, did you mean it this way? I go, what are you talking about? They go, you kept saying almost every day during those 40 days that the water level of Houston was going to rise so high that it would flood the city and overflow the banks of the city and spread across, and it would touch the nation. And the nations of the world would know that Jesus Christ is Lord. I said, I didn't mean it that way, but then I began to process this. There is a battle in the heavenlies. There is a natural reaction to spiritual context. What the devil meant to turn to harm, God's intention was for an outpouring of his presence to flood us with the presence of the Holy Spirit. But it took an earthly flood for the church to rise up and be what the church is supposed to be, and the nations to know. And so the equity that the church has gained and continues to gain, if we intentionally walk through our barriers, walk together, not matter who gets the credit, but we don't let the narrative to be created by the world, but we walk out the message of the gospel and we tell the story. And we build on the foundations that are unshakable. 3 years ago, I did a YouTube piece and an article on the unshakable kingdom based on Romans 8, Hebrews 12, and Psalms 2. The nations rage. The whole earth is groaning, natural and human natural disasters. The nations rage, political unrest. The institutions would be shaken, every institution. Nothing would go without being shaken, including the church institution. Little did we realize how all of us were feeling something. And so I went and saw that. We'd done that 3 years ago, and we republished it. And then we saw a TV special we aired all over the world after Hurricane Katrina, Rita, and Ike, based on personal tragedies, but how every tragedy, with the hope of Christ through the hope of glory, Christ in us, revealed, can take us from tragedies to triumphs. This is an opportunity to keep a perspective of who we are. And the more we go and serve our community, not expecting anything back, what happens is we've increased and we gain moral authority and capital through the world seeing and being diffused by their opinions of us, and they begin to get confused. Even as I shared before, that the president or the governor of Banda Aceh after the tsunami, when we sat down, some of my team sat down with him in the place called the Doorway to Mecca, a place that Christians have been persecuted. But after the tsunami, we sat down with him. Our team, not me, I didn't go, but at that time to Banda Aceh, I've been to Indonesia many times, but our team that came from Australia and from Arizona, from Oklahoma, from Houston, went to represent me and sat down after we'd been serving them and serving the Indonesian churches there to go serve in that area. He said, my mind and my heart are in conflict. And they said, why is your mind and your heart in conflict? And he said, because when 9/11 took place, we danced in the streets at your calamity. But during our time of calamity and difficulty, you're not dancing in the streets. You're here helping us. So my mind and my heart are in conflict. Prior to that, meeting with a former president during the Asian economic collapse, at that time was President Habibie, invited 100 local pastors and myself to the presidential palace. I heard it was a historic moment because it had never happened before to have Christians coming in for a special gathering. And 7 minutes of national television, he gets up and he says, and this is after hundreds of churches have been vandalized, burned down, Christians were under persecution. And he said, forgive us, to quote your Jesus, forgive us, for we know not what we do. And then allowed these pastors and myself to pray for him and lay hands on him. Something happened in the heart of the church in the midst of their difficulty that created a new narrative. And today, there are millions upon millions of Christians, intercessors in Indonesia, the largest Muslim country in the world, that are praying for the nations of the world. Out of our most difficult of circumstances, when we get put in hot water, we find out how strong of tea bags we really are. Every adversity is an opportunity for God to show himself greater. And for those that know, just a little over a year ago, I overcame stage 4 lymphoma. And yet, when people would ask me, how are you doing? I would tell them every day is a good day because I serve a great God. Some days are better than other days. Some days are better good days than other days. But the point is, every adversity is an opportunity for God to show himself even greater. How do we gain capital? How do we use the authority God's given us? It's called the power of relational equity, first with God, then with one another. There's something about serving people who don't even like you that it makes it more difficult for them to come against you. And you remember the story I've shared over the years that a young man who had AIDS and he hated us, would harass us all the time, part of a thing called ACT UP and Queer Nation and other things, and would always harass us. He was a radio disc jockey in Houston. And one day he called me on a 2-hour Christian radio program. It was a call-in show. He began to harass me, changed his name. And I said, is this so-and-so? And he stumbled, yes, it is. And I said, where are all your friends when you really need them? He said, what are you talking about? We cut for each other. We take care of each other. I go, really? When you couldn't pay your rent and your light bill last month, where were your friends? This is live on radio. He goes, how did you know about that? I go, it doesn't matter how we found out. We did. And I thought I would never have to tell you. We did this just to honor God anonymously, but my little team took a personal offering between us. We paid your light bill and your rent anonymously. Shut the mouth of the lion, didn't know what to say. The night before he passed away from full-blown AIDS, I was in Phoenix at a Mission America gathering and was sharing. I got a message from my office and said that he was in the hospital. I asked another spiritual son who came out of that lifestyle, who also was HIV, if he would go and pray for him on our behalf. He went to the hospital, and the first thing this person said was, why would you do that for me? Why did you pay my rent and my light bill? And this is what this other person, Bill, said. He said, that's what Christians do, real Christians do. And we're praying for you that you come into that revelation that we've come into. He gave his life to Christ that night. The next day, he passed away. I shared this story at an Assembly of God church in another part of Texas. A woman comes up to me, and I've never said the man's name in public. She comes up to me and says, was his name such and such? I go, yes. Did you know him? Tears. She said, that was my son. I had been praying, did my son ever come to the revelation of the work of the cross. See, our simple acts of kindness, it doesn't matter if people agree with us, like us, but if we continue to display the good news, be the gospel, bring the gospel, and broadcast the gospel in tangible ways, it will begin to give us the equity and the authority and the power that God had already intended for us in our communities. City councilmen, county judges, governors. As you know, in the last couple of years, we've done prayer gatherings for 5 different governors, and prior to the RNC convention in Cleveland last year, they didn't invite us, but there were people there that wanted to come, and so we did a prayer gathering for the nation in Cleveland, and everybody expected 20,000 people to come and to create disruption and rioting. Instead, less than 20 were arrested because there was such a peace about the whole place. And I believe it's because the church brought the ministry of presence. When the church comes together, putting aside our personal preferences, putting aside our differences for one moment, just lifting up the name of Jesus, things change. We are in a moment I believe is critical. There's a battle in the heavenlies, and we're at a critical juncture. And regardless of our eschatology, this is a moment. This is an opportunity. This is an occasion for our testimony. This is the finest hour for the church. For the church not to be just heard, but the church to be seen. If a Muslim president, 2 Muslim presidents now, and military generals from Muslim countries and others have seen the church in action and they begin to have their hearts open, then what can God do in a culture, in a nation where there has been permeated with the gospel, but for some reason they began to see it become institutional rather than incarnational? Influence. The kingdom of God is built on relationships, first with God, then with one another. And the degree of influence that we have, or capital, is determined on the level of those relationships, first with God, then with one another. It has to start with us. A church united for a nation divided. But I believe this is our moment to see the awakening some have called for and prayed for, and to see the revival we've always been praying for and longing for. This is our moment. Don't let the distractions keep you from keeping your eyes focused on the Lord and on the destination God has for us. Circumstances should not dictate to us who we are, but fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, and to be able to build on the foundations that we know are unshakable. When the wolf comes to huff, to puff, to blow the house down, we won't be like the unwise little piggies. We have built on the unshakable kingdom, the foundations of the Lord Jesus Christ, and the world will see that no matter what we go through, that we're part of a kingdom that is unshakable. Let me just close with this. As you know, I never finish, I just quit. But this one last story, and that is this, that reveresco is a term I learned a few years ago when I had been appointed by a former governor to be on a foundation that the state had established and for faith-based initiatives. And we were having a time to honor volunteers throughout the state. And I heard a motivational speaker, and that was the first time I heard the word referesco. But so I used to say, as so-and-so always said. Then I said, as a person I heard always. Now I say, as I always say. But I wrote this in my book, Leadership Awakening, and I feel like it's important because that's where we are today. God didn't call us to start a race, but to finish the race and finish well. And the word reveresco, and I was talking to my friend Bob McEwen, former congressman under Reagan, and I said, did you know what your name means? He goes, I was always wondering, our crest says reveresco, but what does that mean? I said, well, let me tell you what your crest means. Reveresco came from the McEwen clan of the Scots, who's come to mean now in military terms and some police orders that it means that no matter what you go through, this is not it. You shall overcome. You shall rise again. You shall finish well. So we know that in the unshakable kingdom, it's not over yet. We shall rise again. We shall finish well. And we shall be victorious in Jesus' name. And it comes from the word revival, the Latin word. So it's time for us to pray for authentic revival. It may come away in ways we didn't expect, but this is our moment to take opportunity that's placed before us. let this be an occasion for our testimony. Amen.